The chamber is open and full of whispers.
142 staircases, 4,000 enchanted candles, and in the breast pocket of the greatest wizard alive, an elder wood wand that has not felt conflicted in 46 years, suddenly feels like a compass needle near a second, more powerful north. Dumbledore notices it during the sorting. Not dramatically. He simply reaches into his pocket, wraps his fingers around the wand through the velvet lining, and holds it the way you hold a dog's collar, when you are not yet certain what it has seen. The vibration he feels is not the wand pulling toward conquest, that he has felt before, walking across a ruined Durmstrang courtyard toward a young man with gold hair and dying eyes. This is different. This is the wand pulling away. He presses his fingers tighter. The vibration changes, from tension to something quieter, the sensation of a decision being made. Not by him. The wand holds for 3 more seconds, then goes still. Not because the pull stopped, because it has already decided, and is simply waiting for everyone else to be asleep. Potter, Harry, the whispers ignite. Dumbledore watches the boy walk the length of the hall, slight, dark-haired, glasses slightly too large for a face slightly too thin, and thinks, not for the first time, "I am so sorry, James." The hat sits for 11 seconds. Then it calls Gryffindor, and the table on the left erupts, and Harry Potter smiles uncertainly at people who have been waiting for him longer than he has been alive. Dumbledore does not applaud. He is measuring the distance between himself and the 11-year-old boy walking to his seat, and understanding, with the specific dread of a man who has built his life on knowing things, that he is already behind. The castle sleeps by 11. By 2 o'clock in the morning, Hogwarts is as close to silence as a living building ever gets. At 2:14, the Elder Wood Wand slides out of the headmaster's bedroom. It moves through corridors and staircases with no urgency, at the pace of something that has traveled 600 years to arrive here, and is not about to rush the last 5 minutes. The boys' dormitory door opens. The wand crosses the stone floor in the dark, passing sleeping shapes in 4 poster beds, and stops beside the last bed on the left. Harry Potter is not asleep. He has been lying on his back thinking about the fact that no one has shouted at him in 31 hours, which is a personal record. He feels the wand before he sees it. A warmth near his right hand, specific and deliberate. His fingers close around it before he decides to close them. He sits up. The wand is 15 inches of elder wood, dark almost to black, gnarled with the patience of something that grew at its own speed and no other. It doesn't glow. It emanates. The light is the color of starlight on old silver, not bright, not warm, just present. It fits in his hand with the certainty of something returning, not arriving. In the corridor outside the dormitory, Hermione Granger stops walking. She cannot explain why she is not asleep. She cannot explain the feeling tightening in her chest, not anxiety, not excitement, something older than either, something like recognition. She is standing at the top of the boys' dormitory stairs. She opens the door anyway. The room is dark except for the light from the last bed, and the boy sitting up in it is holding something that makes the air feel older than the castle. She takes 1 step in. The light shifts, warms, not silver now, closer to gold, as if it has noticed her and adjusted. She is 11 years old. She has read more books than anyone in her primary school. She cannot put a word to what she is looking at. She doesn't try. "That's not a normal wand," said Hermione. "I know. It came to you." "Yes, and it called me here." Harry looked at the wand. The warmth in its light had deepened, the way a fire deepens when someone else enters a cold room. "I think," he said. "Yes." Neither spoke for a moment. Hermione closed the door with the precision of someone who has thought about every consequence of every action since approximately age 6, and sat on the edge of the nearest trunk. "Tell me everything you know about the Deathly Hallows," she said. "I don't know anything about the Deathly Hallows." "That's fine." She produced, from her dressing-gown pocket, a small notebook and a pen. "Neither do I." She uncapped the pen. "We're going to fix that. Starting tonight." In his bedroom, Albus Dumbledore wakes at 2:17 to the specific absence of something he has carried for 46 years. He lies in the dark, and takes its measure the way a soldier measures a wound, precisely, without flinching. He rises. He searches his office. He walks through 3 corridors of his sleeping castle and does not find what he is looking for. He sits in his chair. Fawkes opens one amber eye and closes it. Albus Dumbledore sits in the silence where the wand used to be, and realizes, with the slow precision of a brilliant man confronting the outer edge of his own brilliance, that quietly, in the night, without a fight is the most terrifying way for something to go. He calls no one. He sits with it. Outside, 4,000 candles burn, and somewhere in Gryffindor Tower, 2 children are beginning an education no one planned for them. The restricted section has a smell, not the dusty parchment domesticity of the main library, but copper and cold stone and air that has not moved freely in a very long time. The smell of a room that has been waiting. They enter on the second night. Not through subterfuge. The Elder Wand persuades the chainlock's enchantment, without sound or flash, that it has already been opened. The chain falls. The door swings. The books do not scream. They press against their shelves, spines forward, the way a crowd presses toward something it wants to see. Toward the wand. They recognize it, Harry said. They're afraid of it, said Hermione. Maybe both. She moved to the shelves. She had a list, assembled by cross-referencing Hogwarts' catalog with gaps in the restricted section's inventory, the negative space of the collection. Her hand found the first book before she consciously reached for it. Small, bound in something the color of old bone. The title read, On the Sovereignty of the Hollowed Line. No author. No date. The parchment was so old it had passed through yellow and arrived near translucency. She could read it, and she didn't understand why. The script shifted between Latin, Proto-Celtic Runic, and a third language she had never seen, but the meaning arrived not like translation, but like remembering. The way you know the end of a sentence before it's finished. She found a second book 3 shelves down, Anime Fragmenta, a treatise on soul theory and early magical practice, with annotations in the margin from someone who disagreed with the author on approximately every 3rd page. She felt an immediate kinship with that margin writer. The 3rd book found her. It fell from behind a shelf with a soft, deliberate sound, from where it had been placed in the gap between shelving and wall at some point in the past several centuries, biding its time. She picked it up. The covers were 2 flat pieces of elder wood, planed smooth and dark. The binding was thestral tail hair, braided so fine it caught the light only at a specific angle. The pages inside were covered in handwriting so sharp, it seemed less written than cut. No title. She didn't need one. Harry, said Hermione. He crossed to her. The wand held close. The elder wood covers went warm. Not to the touch, but to the eye. A quality of recognition. The wand made a sound so low it was more felt than heard, a vibration at the base of the sternum. That's Antioch's journal, said Harry. He didn't know how he knew. He knew. Hermione sat on the stone floor, journal open across her knees. Harry stood with the wand held overhead, steady. She began to read. She read for 3 hours without stopping. Harry watched her face, because there was nothing else to do and because her face, when she was reading something that mattered, was worth watching, emotions cycling through it faster than they could be named. Comprehension and surprise and recognition, and the specific expression she wore when she found something that confirmed a theory she hadn't yet consciously formed. Twice she made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Once she pressed her fingers flat against a page as if she needed to feel it was real. At 5:20, with the castle beginning its slow pre-dawn shift toward wakefulness, she looked up. Antioch Peverell was insufferable, said Hermione. Completely brilliant, and completely insufferable. He writes like someone winning an argument with himself. Harry lowered himself to sit across from her. Do you think you could actually be his descendant? She had been sitting with it for 3 hours. The question had long ceased to be a question. The mathematics work. There's a gap in his recorded line here. She turned to show him a page where the text terminated mid-sentence, as if the next page had been removed. corresponding to the period of magical persecution in medieval England. Families went underground, surnames changed. A line that began in raw power, the man who made the Elder Wand, could reduce, over 6 centuries, to apparent normalcy. She paused. 2 Muggle dentists with perfect eidetic memory, and a daughter who read her first chapter book at age 3. How do you feel about that? Hermione considered it with the seriousness she gave every question worth answering. Reassuring and slightly irritating. It explains nothing about who I am, and everything about why the wand found me. The dawn light was graying the high windows when they came to the question of the Covenant. It was on the sovereignty of the Hallowed Line. A paired mastery, the text argued, was not the same as shared ownership. The wand chose one master at a time through conquest or death. But the Hollow Line described a second, older bond, a witnessed resonance between 2 magical signatures that the wand acknowledged as its paired purpose. Not 2 masters. 1 instrument, 2 hands. The difference, the text noted, was the difference between a door and a key. The wand acknowledges the pairing or it doesn't, said Hermione. Harry held the Elder Wand flat between them. She placed her left hand at one end. He held the other. The elder wood was warm under their palms, not the warmth of friction, but something internal, something the wood generated from a property with no modern name. They said nothing. The Covenant was not a spell, it was a recognition. The wand's light shifted. Silver, the cold, precise silver it carried in Harry's grip alone. Then, as Hermione's fingers steadied on the other end, deepening through silver into gold, the elder gold of something finding its full range after a long time at partial capacity. The light held for 3 seconds. Then it pulsed once. Silver, gold, silver, and settled. The sound it made was a single sustained note, below hearing but above silence, that resolved into something only describable as agreement. Hermione exhaled. "Right," she said, hands not quite steady. "We have approximately 90 minutes before the castle wakes up." She reached for her notebook. "I've identified at least 3 distinct soul theory frameworks in Anime Fragmenta that Dumbledore definitely doesn't know about, and that we need to fully understand before we go anywhere near the 3rd-floor corridor." She uncapped her pen. "Tell me what you felt when you held the wand for the first time." "Like something coming home," said Harry. "Like a door I didn't know was closed opening." Hermione wrote this down without comment. She underlined it twice. Outside the tapestry, the castle shifted toward its first sounds of morning, pipes in the walls, the distant movement of portraits, the particular creak of very old stone deciding, as it did every day, that another day was beginning. They had perhaps 40 minutes before the first students were up. Hermione was already working. The first month had a rhythm, and Harry learned it by watching until the pattern was clear enough to move inside without disturbing it. Below the school's official schedule was the other one, the early hours work in an alcove behind a tapestry of a one-eyed witch that Hermione had identified as architecturally inconsistent with the surrounding stonework. Which meant it predated the corridor's enchantments, which meant it sat in a legal blind spot regarding Hogwarts surveillance charms. Madame Pince arrived for her morning rounds at 6:45 the next day. The restricted section's chain lock was fastened, exactly as she had left it. She checked it twice, both the physical chain and the enchantment behind it, and found both intact. The shelves, when she raised her lamp and looked through the gate, were in order. Books in their places. No disturbance. She stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Something in the air of the section was different. Not wrong. Simply different. Stiller than it should be. The books, which normally pressed and muttered, and occasionally made threatening noises even when no one was present, were quiet. Arranged, almost, she could not explain this, and would not have wanted to, almost satisfied. 3 books that she could have sworn were on the 4th shelf from the end were not there. She checked the ledger. They were listed. She checked the shelf again. They were gone. Irma Pince stood in the doorway of the restricted section, lamp in hand, for a long, measured moment. Then she closed the gate, refastened the chain, and walked away. Some things in this library she had learned across 40 years of guardianship arranged themselves. Cataloging such things helped no one and disturbed the books unnecessarily. She said nothing to anyone. Ron Weasley noticed them before the second week was out. Not the alcove, the quality they carried into the hours he could see them. The unhurriedness of two people who had already done 4 hours of work before breakfast. He found himself gravitating toward them at meals. "You're both odd," he told Harry at dinner. "Not bad odd. Just, you seem like you already know things." "We read a lot," said Harry. Ron looked at Hermione, who was eating with one hand and annotating parchment with the other. "Yeah," he said. "I got that." He was good company, warm, honest, strategically minded in the way of someone who had grown up playing chess with older brothers and learned early that inferior pieces, used correctly, outmaneuvered superior ones every time. In class, Hermione dialed herself back. Harry could see the cost of it, the precise controlled way she answered questions correctly but not at the depth she was capable of. She had mapped the ceiling in every class within the first 3 days. Flitwick she liked, and was therefore most natural with, which meant he occasionally recalibrated something while looking at her. McGonagall she respected enough to be careful around. Quirrell she watched. Harry watched Quirrell too. The man was afraid of something, the flinching quality of his attention, the stammer that came and went in patterns that did not match ordinary nervousness. Ordinary nervousness peaked with attention and eased in crowds. Quirrell's went the other direction. He was worse when no one was looking at him directly. Worse, specifically, when Harry was not looking at him directly. Harry logged this, said nothing yet. The critical work of week 3 began at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, when Hermione finished her cross-reference of Anime Fragmenta against Antioch's journal and looked up with the expression she wore when theory had become fact. The resonance pulse. We're ready. The protocol. Harry would channel the wand's awareness in a slow outward wave, drawing on the wand's native sensitivity to soul state, its thestral hair core attuned through centuries of proximity to death magic. The wave would pass through stone and enchantment alike, and return directional impressions. "How far can it reach?" Harry asked. "The grimoire suggests approximately a mile at full extension. You're 11, and it's your first attempt. Adjust expectations accordingly." "Half a mile," said Harry. "I'd say a quarter. But try for half." He closed his eyes. He had been practicing this part, the particular quality of extended attention the wand required. Less like casting a spell and more like listening with your entire body. Turning everything outward at once. The wand in his hand was warm, not the heat of physical proximity to fire, but something generated from properties the wood held that had no modern name. The pulse left the wand slowly. He felt it the way you felt the spreading ring of a stone dropped in still water, not physically, but the same outward logic, the same expanding circle of awareness. Through the alcove wall, through the corridor beyond, through stone and staircase and enchantment and the complex layered magic of a castle built by 4 people who did not entirely trust each other, and had therefore warded every room 3 times over. The pulse moved. Harry breathed. The wand's light in the dark of his closed eyes was a deep, steady gold. 3 returns came back. The first, south and west, beyond the castle boundary, indistinct with distance but present. Something registering to the wand's awareness the way a discordant note registered to a trained ear, not loud, not immediate, but fundamentally, precisely wrong. The second, below them. Closer, somewhere in the dungeons or below. The same wrongness at higher intensity, nearer and more coherent, like the same discordant note played closer and louder. The third came from directly in front of him. Harry opened his eyes. His own hand, his own wrist, his own face, if he could see it. The lightning bolt scar on his forehead, invisible to him but apparently legible to the wand's awareness as clearly as the other 2, and not just legible, central, as if the pulse had gone out and found 2 distant objects, and one that was not distant at all, one that was wearing his skin. He lowered the wand. His hand was very still. Hermione looked at his face and went still too. She had learned, in 3 weeks, to read the absence of expression on Harry's face the way other people read the presence of it. The stillness meant something had arrived that he was measuring before he let himself react to it. "There's something in me," he said. "I know." She had felt the pulse's third return through their covenant bond, a sympathetic resonance, distant but clear. The pulse resonated with you. That night, when Voldemort tried to kill me. A piece of him survived, not in something he made. In me. He kept his voice level. The wand had a quality of steadiness that made panic feel structurally impossible while you held it. You're not a Horcrux, said Hermione. Immediate and precise, the voice she used when someone was about to conclude something incorrect and she needed them to stop before the conclusion calcified. A Horcrux is deliberate. It requires intent and murder, and a specific act of dark magic performed in advance. What happened to you was a catastrophic magical rebound. The soul fragment attached to you as an accident, the only available anchor when his killing curse rebounded. It is in you. It is not of you. She held his gaze. The difference is everything. Can it be removed? Yes. Not yet. We need to understand its structure, its connection to the other fragments, whether removing it in isolation alerts the others. She opened her notebook, and Harry recognized this as her way of moving through difficult things. Forward, always forward, into the next necessary question. Because there are more of them, Harry. At least 7. Counting you. The number sat between them in the cold alcove air. He built himself an architecture, said Harry, not a question. The resonance gave us 3 directional hits. Southwest, outside the castle, I believe that's Grimmauld Place. Based on the Black family's known history of dark artifact collection. Below us, in the dungeons, something brought inside the castle recently. And you. She wrote the number at the top of a clean page, underlined it, began a column. We have the resonance signature now. We know what we're looking for. Harry raised the Elder Wand and looked at it in its quiet light. 7 fragments of a dead man's soul, each one a wound in the natural order, and the wand could feel them the way a tooth felt a crack. Precisely. Insistently. Impossible to ignore once located. He thought about what it meant to carry something in your own head that was not yours. He had always felt. He reached for the word and found it had been there all along, waiting for him to need it. Crowded. Like a room with one too many people in it, for as long as he could remember. He had simply never had a name for the feeling before this morning. There was something almost useful about having a name. We need to find all of them, said Harry, and destroy them, before Voldemort finds a way to reconstitute. Before someone else pays the price we could have prevented. She pressed her pen to the page. Someone always pays the price when we wait. Right, said Harry. Hermione was already writing. Professor Quirrell's first practical demonstration, on a Friday afternoon in late September, involved a mild confounding jinx aimed at the nearest student. The jinx left his wand, crossed 4 feet of classroom air, reached the Elder Wand's passive aura, the ambient resonance Harry had stopped consciously noticing the way you stopped noticing the sound of a river, and came apart. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Simply dissolved, leaving nothing behind but the memory of its shape. Harry blinked at Quirrell. Quirrell blinked at his wand. The class noticed nothing. Hermione, 2 seats to Harry's left, had her pen moving but her eyes on Quirrell's face. Quirrell's face cycled through recognition, calculation, and then a stillness that was worse than either. The stammer was gone. Under his turban, in the dark at the back of his skull, something that was not Quirrell went very, very quiet. It had waited 11 years to find the boy. It had made its plans carefully, found its host and its path to the stone. In 4 feet of classroom air, every calculation had just been informed, without a word spoken, that the boy was not what it had planned for. Not merely powerful, the particular power was the problem. Power the Dark Lord had felt before, and had frameworks for. This was something that existed in a different category entirely. The wand's passive aura had dissolved a jinx not by opposing it, but by being so fundamentally misaligned with hostility that the jinx had simply found no purchase and ceased. Harry copied the wand movement into his notebook. He did not look at Quirrell again for the rest of the lesson. He already knew what he'd found. The decision to reveal the Elder Wand was made on a Sunday. Concealment was no longer necessary. The advantages of the wand being visible, the deterrent quality of it, now outweighed continued secrecy. Harry didn't tell Hermione. She arrived at the same conclusion independently, on the same Sunday, and mentioned it over breakfast Monday morning, with the tone of someone confirming a travel route they had already memorized. "Today," she said. "Potions," said Harry. He set the Elder Wand on the desk in front of him at the start of class. He placed it parallel to the desk's edge, perpendicular to his body. In the way you place a document you expect people to read. The effect moved through the room the way pressure moved through water, not visible, but felt in everything it touched. Students stopped writing. The elder wood was almost black in the dungeon's lamplight, 15 inches of something that had no business looking like a student's wand, and did not try to. It looked like something from a case in a museum that no longer existed, from a collection assembled by someone who understood that the most dangerous objects were frequently also the most beautiful, and that beauty was itself a form of warning. The hum it carried bypassed hearing and arrived directly at the part of the nervous system that handled the oldest signals. Every witch and wizard in the room registered it. Professor Snape entered at the precise second he always entered. He was in mid-breath for his opening address, the particular cold authority of his classroom voice already present in his posture, when his eyes went to the desk. To the wand. To Harry. Severus Snape's face, in normal circumstances, was a masterpiece of controlled presentation. A face that gave away nothing it did not intend to give. He had spent 20 years constructing it. In 1.3 seconds, it gave away 4 things. Recognition. The wand was not ambiguous to an informed observer. The elder wood, the length, the specific quality of age it carried. Shock. A single frame of it, there and gone. A crack in the architecture so small that only someone watching for it would catch. Calculation, immediate and automatic. The mind that never stopped processing beginning to process this, running the implications forward at speed. And finally, caution. Not fear. Something more refined than fear, threat assessment stripped of everything that made it an emotion and left with only its structural information. The expression of a man receiving structural information and updating his understanding of the room he was standing in. "Miss Potter," said Snape. His voice was precisely, deliberately level. The way things were level when someone had made a conscious choice about them. "Yes, Professor?" "That wand. Where did you obtain it?" "It came to me." "Is there a problem with my wand, Professor Snape?" The wand made its sound. Not loud, the subsonic note, the single low vibration of something very old asserting its presence. Every student in the room shifted. A collective unconscious redistribution of distance. Snape looked at the wand for one more second. "No," he said, "there is not." Something in the room had been renegotiated, quietly, without anyone being able to name the exact moment it happened. Open your textbooks to page 9. He did not go to Dumbledore that evening. Harry knew this because Dumbledore arrived at dinner still carrying the unresolved uncertainty he had worn since September, the particular look of a man waiting for information he had not yet received. If Snape had reported, that look would have shifted into something more active. Snape instead went to his private office and did not emerge for 2 hours. Harry could not know precisely what happened there, but he could infer its shape from what he knew of the man, a wall stared at with the focused attention Snape gave to problems worth solving. The particular experience of a man who had spent years in Voldemort's presence, who knew in his bones what genuine magical authority felt like in a room, the specific pressure of it, the way it reorganized every other force in its vicinity, sitting with the recognition that he had just felt it again. Coming from an 11-year-old boy in a potions class, coming from a wand that should not exist in the hands it was currently in. Whether Snape concluded this was a catastrophe or a salvation, Harry couldn't yet say. Probably, he suspected, Snape couldn't either. Draco Malfoy had been working toward a confrontation since Monday. He caught Harry after potions, Crabbe and Goyle flanking him at the angle that communicated a specific social geometry. He opened with, "My father is going to hear about the Elder Wand," on Harry's desk inside the classroom they had just left. Made a sound. The classroom door was closed. This was irrelevant. The sound did not require proximity beyond the quarter-mile radius that Harry was beginning to understand as its ambient range. It was the sound of a very large, very old door opening, not a crash, but the deep, slow movement of something with genuine mass that has been shut for a long time and is now, with complete calm, no longer shut. Draco stopped. The sentence stopped with him. His mouth remained open for approximately 1 second. His eyes, which had been performing confidence, performed instead a rapid recalculation. His father felt very far away, not metaphorically, but in the specific physical sense that resources he had spent his entire life understanding as nearby and powerful had just registered, to some portion of his nervous system older than his education, as separated from him by a distance that was not purely geographical. He turned, collected Crabbe and Goyle with a look that dared either of them to say anything, and walked in the opposite direction with the measured pace of someone who has remembered a prior engagement. Harry did not watch him go. He was already walking in the direction he had been going. At the pace he had been going. Hermione fell into step beside him from the alcove of the stairwell where she had been waiting. "He'll try again," she said. "Probably," said Harry, less confidently. "That's all we needed," said Hermione. They had known about the stones since week 2, not from Hagrid, but because the third-floor corridor's protective enchantments registered to the wand's awareness as information about what lay behind them. The signature was unmistakable once Hermione named it. Artificially extended life force. Where a Horcrux was a wound in the natural movement of death. The Philosopher's Stone was an argument against it. The wand recognized it the way you recognized a word in a language you had not spoken in a very long time. Flamel made it as a solution to a problem. Hermione said, "The stone itself has done nothing wrong. Voldemort wants it," said Harry. "Without his Horcruxes, the stone becomes his only remaining path to physical form. Then we remove it from the path." They set the date for December 20th, 10 days before end of term, the castle running at half attention with students already mentally elsewhere. The most practical timing. The corridor door opened without persuasion, the lock opening before Harry framed the request completely, as if it had been waiting for an opportunity to stop pretending. "The enchantments recognize the wand," said Hermione. "They should. Some of them are probably older than the castle." Fluffy woke immediately. 3 heads, 3 sets of bludger-sized eyes, 3 growls that occupied the room completely. Harry stood at the entrance and thought about what the wand's memory held of the Peverell era. A time before magic had been organized into the formal relationship of caster and target. He thought clearly and without urgency that he was not a threat. The growling descended in register, became ambient rather than active, the middle head lowered. Extended, rested its jaw on Harry's left shoulder with the carefulness of something very large that had learned to be careful about its weight. Harry placed his left hand once on its jaw. "Good," he said quietly. "We won't be long." The dog sat. All 3 pairs of amber eyes followed them to the trapdoor with patient attention. The devil's snare reached for them as they dropped through, and Hermione said something in the not-quite Latin that had been arriving in her since the grimoire. 1 flat syllable, less a word than a boundary. And the plant withdrew, informed that it had misjudged the situation. The winged keys formed up at the wand's raised tip without a chase, presenting the correct one in a hover at Harry's eye level, with the dazed quality of objects, asked to behave in a way they were not enchanted for. The stone chess pieces stood aside before they reached the board. Harry thought of Ron, who would have solved this the long way, and enjoyed every minute of it. He would tell him. Eventually, when the full explanation was possible. Ron would sit across from him with that chess player's attention, and find it satisfying, rather than diminishing to learn the board had been walked through, rather than played. The troll was unconscious in the corridor. They stepped around it. Snape's potion puzzle yielded to Hermione in 14 seconds. Then the final door. The mirror of Arist filled the chamber with its presence. Not physically, the room was large enough to contain it comfortably, but the mirror had a quality of presence that made the proportions of the space around it feel negotiable, as if the mirror had the final word on how large the room was. It was taller than Harry had imagined. The frame was elaborately carved. The inscription along the top, Erised stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwoshi, worn by years into something that needed the wand's light to be fully legible. Harry stood before it. He had been uncertain what he would see. He had spent 11 years with desires he couldn't name, wants that were more structural than specific, safety, constancy, the basic architecture of belonging that other children seemed to navigate without thinking. The mirror's legend was that it showed the viewer the deepest desire of their heart. He had wondered, coming through the chess pieces, whether it would show him his parents, whether it would show him something he would have to deliberately look away from. It showed him his parents, for one moment. His mother's eyes, the green that people always told him was hers, that he had never known the meaning of until this specific second, standing in a chamber under Hogwarts in the small hours of December, and finding that he understood it now in a way he had not expected to be able to. His father's hands, Sirius had mentioned the hands once in the atrium, and here they were, exact, and what they were doing was simply resting at his sides in the mirror's frame, in the posture of someone who has nowhere to be, and is content about it. They were beside each other, his parents, and they were looking at him with the expression he had been waiting for 11 years to see on anyone's face. He held it. He let himself hold it. The mirror had checked that he had space for it, and had shown it briefly rather than cruelly, a confirmation rather than a wound, a gift given cleanly rather than administered. Then the image recalibrated. The mirror showed him himself, standing exactly as he stood, the Elder Wand in his right hand, the same alcove cold in his expression, the same quality of presence he was still learning to inhabit without self-consciousness. Hermione was beside him, her notebook in one hand, her eyes already moving to the next problem. The image in the mirror was not a fantasy of who he might become. It was a precise depiction of what he already was, not what he wished for, what he had. He stood with that for a moment too, with the specific quality of a 14-year-old understanding, perhaps for the first time in his conscious life, that the deepest desire of his heart was not something in the future or something he had lost. It was something present. Something that had been present since a September night 3 years ago, when a wand had crossed a dormitory floor in the dark, and a girl had opened a door she wasn't supposed to open, and 2 children had started a conversation that had never really stopped. The stone appeared in his pocket. He reached in and found it. Warm, roughly the size of a walnut, between ruby and garnet in color. "He wants this because he needs a physical body," said Harry. "Without his Horcruxes, it's his only remaining option for reconstitution." "We're not destroying it," said Hermione. She had been examining the mirror's frame. "The stone isn't a dark object. Destroying it because Voldemort wants it is the same logic as burning down a library because someone once tried to use it to cheat on an exam. Flamel needs to know the whole situation. He's 600 years old. He deserves the full truth. We'll write to him tonight." She met his eyes. "You're better at knowing what needs to be said. You're better at everything written," said Harry. "We'll do it together." He put the stone in his inner pocket, where it settled with the warmth of something that knew it was exactly where it was supposed to be. They walked back through the chambers. Quirrell arrived 31 minutes later. He had prepared for every obstacle. He was not prepared for the mirror showing him nothing, just a man standing alone in front of a mirror in an empty room. He searched its surface, as if searching could produce a different result, in the silence at the back of his skull. The Dark Lord's rage was a color without a name. "The boy," said the voice that was not Quirrell's voice. "Always, the boy." The stone was already gone. The invisibility cloak arrived on Christmas morning. Harry knew what it was before he unwrapped it. The wand told him in the register below language where the oldest information lived. The cloak unfolded into his hands like water, and made his fingers not invisible but outside the category of consideration. The wand, held in his other hand, produced a resonance entirely unlike its normal state, something with the quality of a conversation between 2 things long separated that have not lost their shared language. Use it well. No signature. He already knew the signature. He went to Dumbledore's office on the 27th of December. The gargoyle stepped aside. The door opened of itself. He entered the carefully constructed office, portrait-lined walls, silver instruments, Fawkes on his perch, and recognized its function while appreciating its craft. He placed the Elder Wand on the desk between them. Dumbledore looked at it with an expression Harry had not seen on his face before, a man who had thought about something extensively and is discovering that reality differs from imagination in every detail that matters. "The invisibility cloak you sent me," said Harry. "It was my father's. Harry, you held it in your possession for 10 years. His voice was level throughout, the neutrality of someone moving through a prepared sequence. "Without informing me of its existence. Without legal transfer to the heir of the Potter estate. Without the consent of the Peverell blood, heir to whom it belonged by right that predates the Ministry's founding charter by 4 centuries. Dumbledore said, "I kept it safe. As I kept you safe. You kept something that belonged to me in a place I could not access. Safe means protected from harm. Available means accessible to the keeper at the keeper's discretion. For 10 years the cloak was available to you. Not to me." He paused. "You decided when I needed it. You decided what I needed it for. You decided the correct moment for me to receive something that magic itself designated as mine at birth." A long pause. On his perch, Fawkes opened one amber eye. "Your father gave it to me willingly," said Dumbledore. "My father is dead. With him died any transfer of ownership he might have authorized. Inheritance law, wizarding and pre-wizarding both, is unambiguous. An object gifted by a member of an ancient bloodline does not supersede the blood heir's claim at the time of the gifter's death. The object reverts." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "The cloak reverted 10 years ago. I am not accusing you of theft. I believe you acted with the intent of someone who has appointed himself manager of a situation he does not fully own, using tools not fully his to use, in service of a plan that I was not consulted on despite being its central figure. I know what I carry. The wand. The cloak. The regency rights of the Peverell line. I have spent 4 months studying the grimoire and the ancient rites framework." He let that settle. "I intend to use what I carry to dismantle everything Voldemort built. Not because a prophecy says so. Because I understand the board and can see the moves. I expect obstacles from the Ministry. I do not expect them from you." He extended his hand. The longest moment. The Elder Wand lay between them like a verdict already delivered, and Dumbledore reached into the drawer to his left. He placed the invisibility cloak in Harry's open palm. "Thank you, Professor," said Harry. He picked up the wand, put the cloak under his arm, and walked to the door without looking back. Dumbledore sat for a long time. Fawkes sang, once, the sound of acknowledgement, of a weight settling into its correct position after a long time in the wrong one. He looked at the space on his desk where the Elder Wand had rested for 30 seconds. He had not touched it. Had not tried to. In the 23 years since he had taken it from Grindelwald, he had not once felt the wand's absence as something other than theoretical. He had known, academically, that the wand could leave. The history of it was a history of leaving. He had simply never applied that knowledge personally, never inhabited it, never allowed the possibility to become real in the place where real things changed behavior. He thought about a ruined Durmstrang courtyard in 1945. He thought about a young man with gold hair who had also looked at him with that quality of knowing, the specific quality of someone who has done the reading, who understands the structure of the situation, who speaks without performing, because performance requires a kind of uncertainty they do not possess, who was also brilliant, who was also certain, who was also, for a long season, someone Dumbledore had believed he understood. He had not understood Gellert Grindelwald. He had understood what Grindelwald wanted him to see. Harry Potter was not showing him what he wanted to be seen. Harry Potter was showing him exactly what was there. And the directness of it was so complete it registered almost as innocence, until you looked at the eyes. He thought about the plan he had been building since the night the Potters died. The long, careful architecture of positioning and preparation. The space he had carved for Harry. The role he had assumed the boy would grow into under careful guidance. And how completely and quietly, and without apparent effort, that space had become irrelevant. The portraits on the walls were watching him. His predecessors, headmasters and headmistresses stretching back centuries. Each of them familiar with the particular experience of a plan meeting reality and having to be revised. Phineas Nigellus Black, in his frame near the window, was wearing the expression of a man who would have a great deal to say, and was, for once, exercising the wisdom of not saying it. Dumbledore looked at the window. The grounds of Hogwarts beyond it were white with winter, the Black Lake hard and silver at its edges. Somewhere in Gryffindor Tower, a boy with his mother's eyes and something in his hands that was older than the school was reading a 12-page letter from a girl who was probably Antioch Peverell's heir, and together they were making plans that did not include Albus Dumbledore in any executive capacity. He could continue to believe he knew better. That experience and age and the long education of having been right about most things most of the time qualified him to maintain his position as the architect of this particular future. He could find ways to remain central. He was clever enough. He could probably manage it for several years before the boy's understanding exceeded his ability to manage it. Or he could help, not guide, not direct, but help, with the specific subordinate quality of someone who has significant resources and has been asked, clearly and without ambiguity, to make them available, rather than to decide how they should be used. It would require setting down something heavier than the Elder Wand. It would require setting down the belief that the setting down was a loss. He reached for the lemon drop on his desk that he hadn't touched since September, finally ate it, and found it tasted like it always had. He would help. It was perhaps the most useful thing he had done in years. Year 2. The resonance map had carried the dungeon hit since September of Year 1, a directional impression logged with a question mark where the object identity should have been. Hermione identified Ginny Weasley by the second week of September. The dungeon hit, stationary through the summer, had begun moving the moment the Hogwarts Express reached the castle. She spent 4 days mapping the pattern against the timetable of every new Gryffindor student before she had the answer. She found Ginny in the small first-floor bathroom on the 3rd day of term. "I need to show you something. Can you come with me?" Ginny looked at her in the mirror, Ron's coloring and her own expression. Sharper. More watchful. "Is this about my first year?" "Yes," Ginny dried her hands. "All right." Harry was already in the empty classroom when they arrived. "Someone put something in your things," said Hermione, turning to Ginny directly. No preamble performed concern rather than expressed it, and the difference was audible to anyone paying attention. "Before you boarded the Hogwarts Express. Something that doesn't belong to you and was never meant to help you. I need to see your bag." Ginny's face moved through confusion, then the wariness of someone sensing something wrong for weeks without language for it. Then, and this was what Hermione had been watching for, a relief so profound it was almost visible, the loosening of something held very tightly. "There's a diary," said Ginny steadily. "I found it in my cauldron at Diagon Alley. It writes back. I know. It is not a diary. It's a trap, a piece of a dark wizard's soul, designed to feed on the magical energy and emotional trust of whoever writes in it. You haven't done anything wrong. You were targeted specifically. Harry and I were looking. We've been looking since September." Ginny placed the diary on the desk without being asked again. Harry picked it up. The wrongness arrived immediately. Not pain, but information delivered at the wrong frequency. He set it on the floor. The unmaking. "Is it ready?" Hermione had Anime Fragmenta open at the relevant passage, the pre-ministry soul dissolution protocol, the Peverell method of calling a fragment home rather than destroying its vessel, not basilisk venom, not fiend fire. Something that simply asked the fragment, in a register it could not refuse, to stop. Harry held the wand over the diary and thought about Tom Riddle. Not Voldemort, Tom Riddle, the specific brilliant boy who had made this. He did not admire what that mind had done with itself. But he recognized the architecture. He did not engage with the fragment's constructed identity. He simply reminded it, in the register the wand accessed through Peverell blood and the covenant with death, that it was a piece, not a whole. The insistence on remaining separate was not permanence but postponement. The diary resisted. Harry kept the wand steady, and simply continued, the way water continued, the way time continued, with the complete absence of urgency that came from knowing the outcome was not in question. At 30 seconds, the pages began turning themselves rapidly, Riddle's handwriting appearing and retreating. At 38 seconds it stopped. The ink faded completely, without drama. The white of the parchment returned. The book closed of itself with the soft, definitive sound of a door pulled shut by someone leaving for the last time. Harry held it out to Hermione. "That's one," he said. "Is it gone?" asked Ginny. Her voice was quiet, but not uncertain. She wanted the accurate answer, not the comfortable one. "Gone," said Harry. She nodded, absorbing this with the self-possession of someone finally allowed to set down a weight she had been carrying alone. "You said it was a piece of his soul. Not the whole. There are more." Not a question. She had been paying attention to the conversation she was in. "Yes," said Hermione. "We're working on it. Can I help?" Hermione looked at Harry. 11 years old. Just told she had been a vehicle for dark magic, and her first response was to ask what she could do. He thought of Ron, who had responded to the general shape of what they were doing the same way, not with performance, with the practical question of how to be useful. "Not yet," said Harry. "But I'll tell you when." The chamber was below the second-floor girls' bathroom, confirmed through a sink with a serpent-carved tap that didn't match the room's period. Harry descended alone, leaving Hermione at the entrance with an emergency portkey and the absolute authority to use it. She did not use it. The Chamber of Secrets was cathedral-vaulted and serpent-lined and smelled of water and stone and centuries of sealed air. The smell of a place that had not had a change of atmosphere in a very long time, that had absorbed every second of its isolation into the cold of its walls, and was now simply the repository of its own sealed history. The wand's light caught the carved columns as Harry descended, enormous, each one a serpent in stylized ancient relief. The craftsmanship of someone who had built this room to last, and had been right about it. The floor was an inch deep in dark water that reflected the light back inverted and still. The basilisk emerged from the far end. 60 feet. Perhaps more. Old in the way that the stone was old, not the oldness of time past, but of time absorbed, of something that had taken centuries into itself and carried them in its scales. Its eyes were closed. Harry had spoken first, from the chamber's entrance in Parseltongue, not the hissing command register that Voldemort's Parseltongue carried, which the wand had given him the memory of clearly enough to hear the difference, but something lower, something the wand provided from its own memory of the age before magic had been organized into dominance and submission. "I am not a threat to you. I would like to speak." The basilisk stilled, extended, coil after coil from the chamber's far darkness, moving with the fluid patience of something that has nowhere to be, and has learned to make that quality its own. It found him where he stood and oriented toward him without opening its eyes, the way things oriented to the wand. "What are you?" The basilisk's grammar was ancient, structured differently. The syntax older, but comprehensible through the depth of the shared root. The way a very old dialect was comprehensible. "I am the heir of the wand that was made when your kind was already ancient. I am not your master. I know you have been bound here. The object that anchored your binding has been destroyed. The compulsion that maintained the binding is no longer active. You are free to go. I came to tell you." A long silence. The chamber's sounds continued around it, distant water, the deep resonance of the castle's foundations above. Harry waited in the silence without discomfort. He had learned, from the wand, that the things worth hearing took the time they took. The world above. Is there sky? The question arrived with a quality Harry had not expected, and could not immediately name. He held it for a moment before he understood what it was. The question of something that had not seen open sky in 1,000 years, asking whether sky still existed. Not knowing, having no way to know, existing inside a sealed chamber with no information about what waited outside, except the testimony of something that was now standing in front of it, and could be lied to. The way things that could not get out could always be lied to. Harry thought about this. "Yes," he said. "Yes, there is sky." Another silence. "Shorter, I choose liberation," said the basilisk. "Then go. The wards will not stop you. I'll see to it." The basilisk moved, not toward Harry but past him, through the chamber, toward the pipe that led upward, its scales making the sound of stone on stone, enormous and purposeful, for the first time in 1,000 years, in a direction that was its own. Harry watched it go. He stood in the dark water of the chamber floor and listened to the sound of it ascending, the ancient weight of the thing finding its way back toward what had always been up there waiting. Until the sound was gone and the chamber held only the sound of the water and the stone and the absence of what had lived here for so long that the space now felt definitionally different without it. He climbed back out and walked to where Hermione was waiting with her notebook and the expression of someone who had been holding their breath for 11 minutes without admitting it. "We need to write to Lucius Malfoy's solicitor. Tonight, I want everything documented before he realizes the diary is gone." Hermione uncapped her pen, already drafting. Year 3. The resonance map had been carrying the mobile hit since Year 1, a pattern that moved with the specific randomness of a small animal, with strong instinct for proximity to magical warmth. It appeared in the southwest readings at irregular intervals, disappeared for weeks, returned. It traveled without fixed territory, present but not locatable. The kind of pattern that required sustained tracking rather than a single reading to resolve. By the start of Year 3, when it began appearing consistently within the castle itself, tracking with the Gryffindor student population, moving in the specific daily pattern of someone who carried something in a pocket or bag, Hermione had been building its movement map for 2 years. She spent 4 days cross-referencing the pattern against the timetable of every Gryffindor student before she had the answer. The 4th line of her notation read, Weasley, R, Rat, Scabbers, check. Harry asked Ron about the rat on a Wednesday in September. "Scabbers, how long have you had him?" "Ages. He was Percy's before me. 12 years at least, maybe older." "Can I see him?" Ron pulled Scabbers from his pocket, gray, threadbare, missing a toe on his right front paw, watchful in the way of small animals that know they are being observed by something they're uncertain about. Harry didn't reach for him. He simply looked. The resonance hit, at this range, was not an impression. It was a fact. The wrongness of a soul fragment existing where it had no right to exist. The precise frequency of Voldemort's soul signature, arriving through the wand's awareness in the complete and unambiguous way it arrived when he held the wand within 20 feet of a Horcrux. "I need to show you something," said Harry. "Both of you." "Tonight," he told Hermione first. "In the alcove. After dinner." He read the resonance log entry. Read it again. Sat with it in focused silence for 15 seconds. "Peter Pettigrew," she said. "That's my conclusion. He was the secret keeper. He betrayed your parents. He faked his own death, transfigured into a rat, spent 12 years living in a wizarding family too polite to wonder why their pet never died." She paused. "He framed Sirius Black, who has been in Azkaban for 12 years, for a crime Pettigrew committed." The silence that followed was full rather than empty. The silence of 2 people sitting inside the weight of a fact that required everything it required. "We need to be careful about the order of operations," said Hermione. "If Pettigrew realizes we know, he runs. He will not find him again in a hurry." She tapped her pen. "We need him publicly identified and physically unable to transform in a single action. Somewhere with enough witnesses that what happens cannot be disputed or suppressed." She looked at Harry. "The Great Hall. At dinner. 500 witnesses. And it needs to be fast. He will sense the wand's resonance pulse. Every instinct he has cultivated for 12 years will fire simultaneously." She was already writing. "The counter-animagus reversal needs to be drawn from the grimoire. The wand will need to hold the forced transformation through his resistance. He will not like the 6 seconds." "No," said Harry. "He won't." The Great Hall on a Thursday in October held 512 students, 8 staff members, and 1 disguised murderer in a first-year boy's breast pocket. Harry stood at 6:47. He raised the wand purposefully, as a tool being applied to a specific task. The room's volume dropped in a wave, moving outward as the ambient resonance scaled upward, not aggressively, but with the quality of a very large, very certain thing asserting it required attention. The nearest students stopped talking first. Then the next row. Then the next, all the way to the far end of the Slytherin table, where the last conversations ceased in the specific confused way of people who have stopped talking without knowing why. The reversal was not a modern spell. It was a technique from the grimoire, the insistence, through Peverell blood, and the covenant with death, that a thing be what it actually was rather than what it was pretending to be. It found Peter Pettigrew in Ron's breast pocket. Ron, who had not been told in advance, stood up so fast his bench scraped backward, pulling the rat out by instinct, holding him in both hands with the expression of someone who has just realized that what they have in their hands is not what they thought it was, and is getting less like it every second. The shape changed, not smoothly, resisting its own nature at every increment, the mechanism operating in contradiction to its design. 6 seconds. Peter Pettigrew stood on the Gryffindor table in the center of the great hall, gray-faced and trembling and missing a finger on his right hand, surrounded by 500 students, and 8 members of staff, and 500 plates of Thursday evening dinner. The great hall was absolutely, completely, historically silent. The quality of it was different from ordinary silence. It was the silence of 500 people, simultaneously processing an image that contradicted every category their minds had prepared for the scene in front of them. A first-year girl at the Hufflepuff table had her fork halfway to her mouth and did not complete the journey. A 7th year at the Ravenclaw table had his notes out and his quill raised, and forgot for approximately 15 seconds that either existed. Professor Flitwick, at the staff table, looked at the figure on the Gryffindor table, and then at Harry, and then at the figure again, with the expression of someone running a very rapid calculation and arriving at a result that contradicted every assumption the calculation was built on. Harry lowered the wand. Peter Pettigrew, you're under citizen's arrest under the Peverell Regency Act, Ancient Clause 7, concealment of truth by magical means in a matter of life and liberty. You have the right to say nothing. I would recommend saying nothing. Pettigrew said a great many things. He said them quickly and simultaneously and in no particular order of coherence, that it wasn't his fault, that he'd had no choice, that they didn't understand, that Voldemort was too powerful, that he'd been scared, that he'd tried to warn them, that he was sorry, that they had to understand, that he could be useful, that he knew things, that it was more complicated than it looked, that he was sorry, that he was sorry, that he was. The wand made its sound. The single subsonic note, the single low vibration that the chamber's stone walls received, and reflected back through the floor rather than the air. Pettigrew stopped talking. In the silence, somewhere at the Gryffindor table, Ron Weasley sat down very slowly with the expression of someone who has just had 12 years of casual affectionate pet ownership fundamentally recontextualized. Hermione had the restraints ready, grimoire pattern bindings, the kind no standard counter-charm could release. She handed Harry the case file. 400 pages. Pettigrew's Death Eater status, his appointment as secret keeper, 3 independent testimonies confirming the switch had been Sirius's idea, Sirius's attempt to protect a man already planning his betrayal. The file also contained Sirius Black's Azkaban intake records, which contained on page 7 the absence of a trial transcript. Not redacted, not sealed. Absent, Sirius Orion Black had never been tried. He had been placed in Azkaban by Bartemius Crouch Sr., acting under emergency wartime powers, without charge, without trial, without the right of response that wizarding law had guaranteed to the accused since the founding of the Wizengamot. Harry had read this entry in October of Year 1, and had been, for approximately 4 minutes, not calm. Then he had written Sirius Black's name at the top of a clean page, and begun a column of what needed to happen. He went to the Ministry himself, not to petition but to inform, in the formal register the Regency claim required, that Lord Harry James Potter Peverell would be attending their offices to present evidence in the matter of Sirius Orion Black, and that the Peverell Regency Act entitled this attendance to be received without procedural barrier. He brought the case file. Pettigrew and Grimoire conjured restraints, and Hermione, who sat to his left with the expression of someone prepared for every possible response to every possible question, and experiencing the mild interest of watching her preparation prove correct in sequence. He laid the evidence. He invoked Clause 14 of the Peverell Regency Act, the word of the hollow heir in matters of life and liberty legally equivalent to sworn Wizengamot testimony, and stated clearly that Sirius Black had been wrongfully imprisoned without trial on the testimony of a confirmed Death Eater. Fudge asked 3 questions, received 3 complete answers, and reached for his quill. Sirius Black walked out of the ministry on a Tuesday afternoon in November, 12 years thinner, 12 years grayer, carrying the stillness of someone who has maintained himself through the structural discipline of deciding, each morning, that he would not come apart today, who has maintained that practice for so long that the stillness has become architectural rather than effortful. Harry was waiting in the atrium. The atrium was its usual midweek bustle, witches and wizards crossing between departments, paper airplane memos tracking overhead, the golden fountain at the center casting its light upward in the specific ordinary way of an institution proceeding through Tuesday, in complete indifference to the fact that something important was happening in its lobby. Sirius came through the door from the processing corridor and stopped. He stood there for a moment. He was wearing robes that the ministry had sourced from somewhere, and that did not fit him, too broad at the shoulder for the man Azkaban had returned. His hands were at his sides. He looked at Harry from across the lobby with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment for 12 years, and is discovering, now that it has arrived, that he had imagined it so many times that the reality of it requires a moment to become real. He crossed the atrium. He placed both hands on Harry's shoulders and looked at him from approximately 1 foot. "You look like James," he said, his voice rough with disuse, but present, fully present, the voice of a man who has decided he is going to use it. "But you move like something older. The wand, it changes how you carry yourself." Sirius looked at the elder wood in Harry's hand with the expression of a man who had grown up in a family that collected dark artifacts, and who therefore had the specific knowledge to understand exactly what he was looking at. His hands on Harry's shoulders tightened slightly. In them Harry could feel the slight tremor that the stillness was containing. 12 years of grief and rage and injustice, and the specific cellular wrongness of Azkaban, all of it held by the architecture of a man who had decided to put himself back together and meant it. "The Elder Wand," said Sirius. "Yes, a moment." Then he laughed, real and rusty and rising from a depth the Dementors had not quite reached. James would have been absolutely insufferable about this. "I know. I'm choosing not to be. Very wise. You get that from Lily." Harry said nothing. The fountain cast its light upward between them, and outside the ministry the November afternoon was cold and ordinary, and entirely, completely free. Hermione called it the accounting. She had been building it since year 1, a systematic record of what had been spent, what had been taken, what was owed, not a list of grievances. A document. 7 sections. Legal violations. Appointment irregularities. Financial instruments. Evidence suppression. Blood status discrimination codified into ministry policy. Known Death Eater associations with current ministry personnel. And the final section, titled simply, Pattern. Because individual violations could be attributed to individual failures. Pattern could not. 412 pages. Every claim sourced. Every inference labeled as inference. Every fact labeled as fact. In the 3-color system she had used since the beginning. Black for confirmed. Blue for strongly evidenced. Red for circumstantial but coherent. There was very little red. If she was patient enough with the research. Most things that started red eventually turned black. The Wizengamot session was called on a Thursday morning in February of year 3, not requested but demanded, under a right older than the institution it was being applied to. Under the Peverell Regency Act, the heir of the Hollowed line held the right of immediate floor access to any session of the Wizengamot, this right predating the Wizengamot's own charter by 400 years. Harry wore his school robes. Deliberate, he was 14 years old in his 3rd year at Hogwarts. Dressing otherwise would have been a costume. The school robes, with the Elder Wand visible and the Peverell signet ring on his left hand, were simply what was accurate. He stood in the center of the circular chamber and looked up at 50 faces. The Board of Governors of Hogwarts School currently contains 4 members whose appointment documentation cannot withstand scrutiny under basic conflict of interest law. His voice carried without effort. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement has, over the past 8 years, failed to pursue 37 filed complaints against individuals identified in the report you are about to receive as associates of the Death Eater movement. He paused. These failures are not incompetence. They are a pattern. The copies of the accounting were distributed at that moment. 50 copies, one for each member, carried by the Wizengamot's own clerks through the antechamber door, because Hermione had arranged this with the Chief Warlock's office in advance. 50 pairs of hands. 412 sourced, 3 color-coded pages. I am invoking pre-ministry regency privilege to demand the immediate suspension and independent audit of the Board of Governors, the resignation of any Wizengamot member whose appointment is referenced in this report, and the formal prosecution of Lucius Malfoy under Article 7 of the Peverell Regency Act. He had saved the last for last. The deliberate theft of blood status, rights, and political standing from magical citizens of non-pure ancestry through institutional corruption is blood theft. It has always been blood theft. Under the pre-ministry magical law that the Wizengamot's own founding charter acknowledges as superseding standard statute in cases of blood and hollow conjunction, it carries penalties that no subsequent legislation has repealed, because no subsequent legislation addressed it. He looked up at the tiered rows. The ministry did not repeal this law. The ministry buried it. I am unburying it. 4 minutes. Exactly. Lucius Malfoy was in the gallery. He had received no prior notification this session would concern him. He was on page 34, documenting the financial instruments he had used between 1987 and 1991 to place 4 individuals on the board through gifts, loans, and arrangements subsequently cashed in as votes. When Harry finished speaking, he raised his wand. The Elder Wand made its sound. Lucius's wand did not fly from his hand. It went cold, the specific, immediate cold of an object that has been in the presence of something it cannot contest, and has registered this fact at the only level available to it, which was its temperature. He could not make it do anything. He lowered it. In the tiered rows, the reading continued. Pages turning. The blue notations, strongly evidenced, appearing frequently in the earlier sections, then giving way to black through the middle chapters, then arriving in the final section, the pattern section, in an unbroken sequence of black that ran for 60 pages without interruption. The votes came at 11:47. Board suspension, 31-4. Passed, Diemley investigation, 33-4. Passed, Malfoy prosecution, 26-4, the closest, 4 votes in the margin. Harry had known this would be the closest. Prosecuting a sitting board member under pre-ministry law that most current Wizengamot members had never read was a larger step than auditing or reviewing. Large steps required more people to decide, in the moment, that they were willing to take them. 26 had. As the chamber cleared, Lucius reached the exit with 2 Aurors at his flanks. He turned at the door and looked at Harry across the chamber floor. The look contained everything that could not be said with this many witnesses. Fury, disbelief. The sensation of a man who has confused the map for the territory for so long that discovering other features comes as a physical shock. Harry held his gaze for 2 seconds. Deliberate, not performance. Then he turned back to Hermione, who was reviewing the vote tally against her projected model and noting, with the small private satisfaction she reserved for her own work, that 26 had come in exactly as she had calculated. "The Ethics Committee review," said Harry. 3 months minimum. I've already drafted the supplementary brief. Of course you have. Sirius descended from the observer gallery. Page counts? 62 pages, said Hermione. Cross-referenced. Obviously, said Sirius. They walked out together into the ministry's ordinary Thursday business. Harry carried the accounting under one arm, the Elder Wand in the other, and the quiet satisfaction of someone who has completed the first stage of a process that was always going to take longer than a single morning. Outside, London continued. Hermione was already writing the next item on the agenda. Year 4. The Triwizard Tournament arrived in September with its complement of spectacle, danger, and institutional self-congratulation. Harry noted all 3 and set them aside. Stripped of pageantry, a competition currently functioning as the outer layer of a plan that Voldemort's shade and a compromised ministry official were using to produce a body count of one. Harry had identified this plan in the second week of term through the resonance map, which had been showing an anomalous signature on the Triwizard Cup since the opening feast. The cup's enchantment carried a trace of Voldemort's soul signature, faint, attenuated by layers of legitimate tournament magic, but present to the wand's awareness the way a black thread was present on white cloth. He showed Hermione the reading on the second day of October. 45 seconds of reading. The cup is a portkey. Destination? Probably Little Hangleton. We have two options. Neutralize the portkey before the final task, or control the destination ourselves. The second gives us more information about Crouch's movements, and keeps him in position until we're ready. Who else is in the castle that shouldn't be? She pulled out the soul clarity scan she had been running on the tournament's adult participants. She placed her finger on one name. Alastor Moody. Magical signature. Unstable. Fluctuating between two distinct baselines in a pattern consistent with sustained polyjuice-dependent transformation. The true signature beneath matched the Crouch family register. Bartemius Crouch Jr. He has had sustained unsupervised access to hundreds of students. His plan requires you specifically at a specific moment. The cup. He needs me to touch it. Harry paused. Let him plan for that. We pull him out when we choose. After the tournament. It's useful to watch him operate. She met his eyes with the expression she wore when she was being precise about something that mattered. But before the final task. We are not getting in that cup. We are absolutely not getting in that cup, said Harry. His name came out of the Goblet of Fire on the evening of October 31st. Dumbledore said it. The hall went still. Harry stood, because sitting when your name was called was a choice that communicated something he preferred not to communicate, and walked to the anteroom with the even pace he always walked, the pace the wand had installed in him through 3 years of proximity to something that was not impressed by urgency. In the anteroom, Fleur Delacour looked at him with cool assessment. Victor Krum looked at him with the flat attention of a sportsman evaluating an unknown competitor. Cedric Diggory looked at him with the specific discomfort of someone who had been looking forward to being the Hogwarts champion, and was now uncertain what he was instead. The officials arrived. The conversation that followed was entirely predictable. Magical contract. Binding, no choice but to compete. The goblet's word was law. Harry listened. I'll compete, he said, when something was expected from him. No elaboration. He offered none. In the corridor outside, walking back toward Gryffindor Tower, he found Hermione waiting in the alcove near the tapestry. Binding magical contract, said Harry. I compete. And the cup? I reach it first in the final task. Redirect the portkey enchantment. Control the destination. Crouch gets nothing. He paused. I'd like to win, if we're doing this. Seems inefficient not to. You'd like to win the Triwizard Tournament, said Hermione. I'd like to complete every task efficiently and with the minimum possible drama. That's not the same as winning. It'll produce the same result. She considered this. I'll need to design the resonance path for the maze. If the wand can read optimal routes through the hedges in real time, you won't need to fight anything you don't choose to fight. How long? I've been working on it since October, she said. It's ready. Task 1 was on a Tuesday morning in November. The arena had been constructed on the Quidditch pitch's north end, tiered seating rising on 3 sides, the fourth open to the judge's box. The whole structure carrying the specific energy of 20,000 people who had been told something spectacular was going to happen, and who were invested in being correct about this. The noise was a physical thing, a pressure that Harry registered and filed alongside the cold of the November air and the smell of the dragon before he could see it. He entered the arena last, by the draw's order. The Hungarian horntail was chained at the center, and it was enormous in the way that very few things Harry had encountered were enormous, not just large but scaled differently, occupying space the way weather occupied space, with a quality of presence that made the dimensions of the arena around it feel provisional. The chains were iron links the diameter of Harry's forearm. The dragon pulled against all of them simultaneously, not in panic, but in the sustained, specific fury of a creature of absolute power that has been put in a position it finds insulting. The crowd noise peaked when he entered. He did not register it as sound so much as pressure. He registered it and moved through it, walking to the center at the same pace he walked everywhere. Because the pace was not a performance of calm, it was simply what he did. He stopped 20 feet from the horntail. He held the wand loosely at his side. He did not raise it. He did not assume any particular stance. He stood and he looked at the dragon. And the dragon looked at him. And the 20,000 people in the tiered seats looked at both of them, and experienced the specific confusion of watching something they did not have a framework for. The wand's memory was not of spells for this moment. It was older than that. It was the memory of a time before magic had been organized into the formal relationship of the wizard and the world, before the world became a subject to be acted upon, and became instead a presence to be communicated with. The recognition that everything with sufficient complexity had something like a language, and that the oldest magic was the practice of speaking it. Harry thought about the fire, not about directing it or blocking it, about the fire itself, about what the wand's memory held of an age when fire was not something you conjured from a wand tip, but something you asked a favor of. He asked. The horntail exhaled. The fire left its jaws fast and enormous, and blue-white at full temperature. The specific blue-white of a horntail's flame. The kind that could melt iron chains if sustained long enough, aimed at the 11-stone 14-year-old in its direct path. The fire reached a point approximately 6 feet from Harry, and bent. Not blocked. Not deflected. It changed direction. Downward. Tracking the arena floor in a slow arc away from Harry toward the left perimeter, and where it touched stone it left, for 4 seconds before the temperature equalized, the outlines of flowers. Enormous, architecturally impossible flowers in lines of still burning light. The horntail watched this happen. Then it looked at Harry. Then at the flowers cooling into black ash outlines. Then at Harry again. Harry stepped past the dragon's left foreleg. He reached the nest. He picked up the golden egg. He walked toward the tent entrance. The arena was silent for a count of 5. Then it became something else entirely. In his earpiece, a communication charm adapted from the grimoire's companion resonance protocols, Hermione's voice arrived. The fire listened to you. The wand remembers a time when it would. A pause. We are going to have a very long conversation tonight. I know. You've already started taking notes. I know that too. Task 2 passed without significant incident. Harry retrieved Hermione from the lake in 18 minutes using a resonance pulse, the easiest thing the wand had done all year, given that their covenant bond made her magical signature as legible to it as his own. He surfaced with Hermione and with Fleur's sister, who had been the secondary hostage. You retrieved a second hostage, said Hermione, treading water. She was there, said Harry. The task only required. She was there, said Harry again. Hermione looked at the girl, small and shivering and alive. Then she swam for the bank. Task 3 was the maze. Harry entered it moving at the pace the wand's resonance reading of the optimal path indicated. Not fast, not slow, calibrated to the maze's actual layout. 15 minutes. 3 obstacles engaged and dismissed. Cedric Diggory appeared from the left hedge at the final junction, breathing hard after 31 minutes. You should take it, said Cedric. You've been here since. We'll take it together, said Harry. We both touch it simultaneously. We both win. The rules don't address that because they didn't consider it possible. He held the wand at his side. It's possible. A moment. All right, said Cedric. Harry had already modified the cup's enchantment, reached it through the hedge wall with the wand's resonance 3 minutes earlier, located Crouch's portkey charm, and removed it entirely. In its place, a simple apparition point charm, destination the headmaster's office. They gripped the cup simultaneously. The headmaster's office arrived around them. Dumbledore looked up from his desk. Cedric assessed the room with understandable confusion. Sirius Black, in the chair to Dumbledore's left in his capacity as Harry's guardian, was already looking at the corner near the instrument cabinets. The chair there was occupied. Grimoire pattern bindings applied by Sirius acting on resonance scan results Harry had forwarded through their communication charm 18 minutes into the maze. The face was Moody's. The magical signature, free of Polyjuice's camouflage for the past 40 minutes, was not. Bartemius Crouch Jr. looked at Harry with the expression of a man who has spent a year executing a plan of extraordinary complexity and has just discovered the boy at its center knew it was happening from the second week of September. "You have been in contact with Voldemort's shade within the last 6 months," said Harry. The wand in his hand was still. "Not restraint, but completion. I can see it on you the way light sees shadow." Crouch wept. Ungovernable, genuine, the weeping of someone whose careful construction of disguise has been dissolved not by superior force but by simple, complete, accurate perception. Cedric, with the golden cup still in one hand, looked between Harry and Sirius and the weeping man, and back to Harry. "Do we both get the points, or you get the points? I'll sort this out. Congratulations on winning the tournament." Cedric looked at the weeping man again. "I feel like I've won the wrong thing." "You won exactly what you competed for," said Harry. "That's the correct amount." Voldemort's shade arrived at the boundary of Hogwarts grounds on a Wednesday evening in late June. Harry felt it before the wards registered it. The resonance map's most sensitive setting produced a hit of such clarity that he was already sitting up in his dormitory when the outer ward line gave its delayed notification. The full signature, the soul of Tom Riddle in the last coherent configuration it would ever occupy. The wards held. More than held, they pressed back with the accumulated strength of 3 years of the wand's ambient influence, the castle's foundational enchantments, operating at the level their original architects intended but centuries of ordinary use had eroded. Voldemort's wraith met the boundary, and could not pass it. Harry dressed, and went to find Hermione. She was already awake. She had felt it through the covenant bond. "He's at the boundary," said Harry. He placed a message on the table between them, written in a hand not quite human, letters correctly formed but with effort behind them. "Come to the Riddle graveyard alone, or he finds ways to reach me through others." Hermione looked at it without touching it. "He's reduced to threats against third parties. He can't reach you directly, can't re-enter Britain's magical infrastructure through any of the channels we've closed. He has Nagini, Wormtail, and a wraith body sustained by unicorn blood. He's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Not this one. Not predictably. She wrote something," he said alone. "I know. We go together. He knows we'll do that." She met his eyes steadily. Then he already knows he's dealing with someone who doesn't operate on his terms. Good. Let him know early. The surprise wears off faster. The preparation took 4 weeks. Not uncertainty, thoroughness. Harry had known since year 3 that the final operation would require simultaneous multi-point resonance, all remaining fragments addressed in a single coordinated application. Sequential unmakings gave connected pieces time to scatter and re-anchor. Simultaneous meant they all came apart at once, before any fragment could register that the others were going. The simultaneous resonance architecture had been Hermione's theoretical project since the second month of year 2, when she had understood the full structure of what they were dealing with. She had built it across 2.5 years in the section of her notebook tabbed with the single-word endgame, which Harry had never read, because she had asked him not to until she was certain it was correct. In May of year 4 she had handed it to him without comment. He had read it in one sitting. He had given it back. He had said, "It's correct." She had said, "I know." The remaining pieces, Nagini's fragment, Voldemort's wraith self, and Harry's scar. The scar was the subject of their longest conversation. 3 evenings across the final week of term, sitting in the alcove past midnight with the grimoire open between them and the resonance map's data spread across the desk. The grimoire's language, in this section, was precise in the way that things were precise when the thing being described was genuinely dangerous, a willing approach to the death threshold. Not death, the place where the soul fragment would lose its anchor because the host had moved close enough to the boundary that the fragment's claim to continued existence became untenable. At that moment, with Harry's resonance providing the tuning fork and Hermione running the dissolution protocol, the fragment would release. The host had to survive the threshold. Harry had read this entry 3 times in the same evening, which was something he did with very few things. Each reading arrived at the same place, not dread, not resistance, but the particular quality of a decision that has already been made and is simply waiting to be executed. The outcome was not in question. The process required clarity, and he had it. Then Sirius and Lupin need to be present for the monitoring. Hermione, I've already asked them. Little Hangleton at dusk, the village unremarkable in the way of English villages that have never needed to be remarkable. A church, a pub, a scattering of houses on a hillside, with the particular English quality of having been there long enough that their presence felt geological, rather than constructed. The Riddle house on the hill above was dark, derelict, the specific darkness of a building that has not had a genuine human presence in 40 years, a building that has given up pretending to be a building and is now simply a collection of walls, waiting to be something else. The graveyard was below it. Marble angels, yew trees whose roots had been there longer than the village. The Riddle family headstone at the far end. White stone darkened at its base where the earth had been doing what earth did to white stone for several centuries. And above the center of the graveyard, gathered in the air with the quality of smoke given intention, the wraith of Tom Riddle. It had achieved a coherence that it had not had in years. Not a body, not even close to a body, but a presence with shape, with density, with the specific quality of something that understood itself as a center of gravity rather than as an absence. The eyes were red, the only consistent feature in a form that shifted at its edges like heat above summer asphalt. It saw the Elder Wand. The sound it made was not describable in the terms available to human experience of sound. It was the sound of a comprehensive understanding arriving, confirmation of its greatest fear, and the explanation for everything that had failed to go according to plan across 4 years. Every closed channel, every neutralized fragment, every carefully constructed pathway that had simply ceased to function. The wand. It had always been the wand. "You carry what should be mine," said Voldemort's shade. His voice had the quality of something speaking from significant distance while occupying the same space, present but attenuated, the way old pain was present in a healed wound, felt at a certain angle. "Nothing that chooses willingly can be should," said Harry. "The wand isn't mine any more than it's yours. It's here. That's enough. You are a child. You're a fraction of a soul in a form that requires effort to maintain." Harry held the wand at his side, not raised, simply held, as an extension of what he was rather than a tool he was deploying. "I'm not sure child is the most relevant comparison point right now." The shade moved. Not toward them. It was not capable of approaching the Elder Wand in the way water was not capable of flowing uphill, the wrongness of its soul state meeting the wand's fundamental alignment with natural death, like 2 incompatible magnetic poles. But it gathered itself. The coherence of it increased, the density at its center pulling the edges inward. And what emerged was the full weight of a presence that had once been the most feared magical mind in Britain, carrying the structural memory of that power even in this diminished form. "I cannot be destroyed. You have broken my anchors. I acknowledge it. But I am still here. I will find others. I have done it before." The red eyes moved to Hermione. "And when I have rebuilt, I will have the time to be thorough about what I do to the people you have placed in my way." Harry said nothing. He turned to Hermione, who had the grimoire open at the 7th section, the one they had not opened until they were 15 by their own agreement, and which she had read twice since then, and had ready now with the resonance protocol marked in red. She was reading it with the focused attention of a surgeon, reviewing a procedure rehearsed completely, and now being executed. "Ready," she said. Harry looked back at the shade. "Nagini," he said, in Parseltongue. The great snake was coiled at the base of the Riddle headstone, enormous and still, her scales carrying the quality of something that has been carrying a weight for a very long time, and is very tired. She had been there when the shade arrived. She had been there before that. She was, Harry thought, always here, the most loyal and most imprisoned of all the things Tom Riddle had ever claimed. "Heir of the old wand," she said. Her Parseltongue was slow, not weak, deliberate, the pace of something choosing each word with care. I have felt you approaching for weeks." "I know," said Harry. "I came to ask you something first." "Ask." "The piece of him inside you. It has been there since before I was born. It is not yours. It was never yours. It was placed in you without your consent, in service of a purpose that was never about you." He held the wand steady. "I can remove it. It will not hurt. And after it is gone, you will be entirely yourself." "And after?" she said. "You go wherever you choose. The world above has sky." A long silence. The graveyard's night sounds continued around it, wind in the yew trees, the distant lights of the pub in the village below, the ordinary November dark proceeding on all sides and the particular indifference of nights that have no idea they are historical. Nagini's great head turned, very slowly toward the shade. The shade, which had been gathering itself for further speech, went still. In that stillness Harry could see, or feel, through the wand, the shape of a relationship as old as the fragment inside her, the thing that had used her, had needed her, had spoken through her, had never once in 50 years asked her anything. "He never asked me anything," said Nagini. He told. "I know," said Harry. Another silence. "Shorter. Remove it," said Nagini. The ritual took 12 minutes. Harry held the wand and Hermione counted in the communication charms channel, a number every 30 seconds, giving Harry the architecture of time while the wand's work extended outward. The simultaneous resonance required holding every fragment in the wand's awareness at once, Nagini's piece, Voldemort's wraith self, and the fragment in Harry's scar, all three addressed at the same frequency. All three reminded, in the register the wand accessed through Peverell blood and the covenant with death, that they were pieces, not wholes. The insistence on remaining separate was not permanence, it was postponement. Nagini held perfectly still through her piece's dissolution. 40 seconds. When it was gone she exhaled, long and slow, carrying something Harry recognized. The relief of a room that has had one too many people in it, finally having exactly the right number. She coiled into the base of the Riddle Grave's shadow, and closed her eyes with the completeness of something that has made a choice. Voldemort's wraith self could not contest the wand directly, could not contest the fundamental alignment that made the Unmaking's request irrefutable at the level it was being made. But it had spent 50 years treating its own continuation as the only non-negotiable fact of its existence, and the habit of that refusal ran very deep. The shade came apart the way fog came apart at dawn. Not suddenly, not dramatically, grain by grain of false permanence surrendering to the deeper logic of how things were supposed to be, the slow, complete, utterly irreversible dissolution of something that had mistaken its own insistence for power. The red eyes were last to go. They held for a moment, not in defiance, Harry thought, but in the final recognition of a mind understanding what was happening to it, that it had been happening for a long time before tonight, and that it had never been preventable, only delayed. Then they were gone. Harry turned the wand on himself, on the lightning bolt scar he had carried since he was 15 months old. He gripped Hermione's hand. She counted backward from 12, in the even voice she used for things that required precision rather than comfort. The fragment recognized the wand. Of course it did. It had been registering the wand's presence since September of year 1. What was unfamiliar was the direction. The fragment resisted. Harry did not fight the resistance. He simply continued, the way he always continued. With the complete absence of urgency that came from knowing the outcome was not in question. The wand held his magical signature as its reference, and addressed the fragment with the full weight of the Peverell Covenant. You are not of this person. You were never of this person. The blood you are anchored in is the blood of the line that made me. And I am asking you to stop. Hermione reached 7. 6, 5, the fragment came apart. Not painful. The sensation of a room that has had one too many people in it for 14 years suddenly having exactly the right number. The adjustment so complete and immediate that Harry stood in the little Hangleton graveyard and breathed the night air and felt, for the first time in his conscious life, the specific quality of his own presence in his own body without anything else in it. Hermione said, 1. Harry opened his eyes. She was already reaching for the resonance map. It was blank. Every directional hit, every logged frequency, every mark on the grid that had been building since the first resonance pulse in a cold Hogwarts alcove in October of year 1. The map that had guided 4 years of surgical, patient work. Blank, clean, the specific blankness of a completed thing. She looked at it for a long moment. Then, she looked at Harry. "Done," she said. Not as a celebration, simply the accurate word for what had just occurred. Harry looked at the blank map. At the quiet graveyard. At the yew trees and marble angels and the ordinary English night continuing around them. He thought about a small storage cupboard under a staircase on Privet Drive, about a dormitory floor and a wand that had crossed it in the dark. He thought about all the places the path had gone before arriving here. "Right," said Harry. Hermione put the map away. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. She uncapped her pen. "We need to write the report for Dumbledore tonight. And the ministry notification, the Visingamot precedent filing, the international alert to withdraw." Harry watched her write. "In the morning," he said. She looked up. He was still looking at the graveyard, the blank and quiet fact of it, the November night above Little Hangleton that was, he thought, the most ordinary thing he had ever seen, and for that reason exactly the most extraordinary. "In the morning," said Hermione after a moment. She closed the notebook. They stood in the graveyard a while longer, not speaking, while the English night continued around them, in the complete, ordinary, utterly sufficient way that the English night always had. The Elder Wand, in Harry's hand, was still. The world did not transform overnight. What happened instead was an exhale. 12 years of fear, the knowledge, at the back of every wizarding household's awareness, that the thing that had killed the Potters and 37 other families had not been destroyed, but only interrupted, released itself over the following months with the structural quality of a building settling after a load it had carried too long was finally removed. Not suddenly. In the nights first. In the quality of sleep. In the way people in Diagon Alley stopped checking their peripheral vision before they said a name. Tom Riddle's name. They said it now, with the simple factual ease of using the correct word for something that no longer had the power to summon what it named. The Board of Governors underwent its independent audit and was reconstituted through a merit review panel Hermione had designed in the accountings appendix, cross-referencing educational philosophy, professional record, and conflict of interest disclosure, producing for the first time a governing body whose composition could be defended on grounds other than wealth and social proximity. Hogwarts curriculum was revised. Ancient runes moved from elective to required, beginning in year 3, by 9 votes to 2. The change was proposed by Hermione in a formal submission to the board that ran to 40 pages including appendices, argued through the specific Peverell-era framework that had been the foundation of everything they had built. The 2 dissenting members wrote responses that she read carefully, noted the valid structural objections in, and addressed in the revised curriculum design she submitted 3 weeks later. Professor Babbling, who had taught the subject for 22 years with the quiet dedication of someone ahead of their institution's readiness, sat in her office a while when she received the notification. Then she went to find more copies of the introductory textbook. The Defense Against the Dark Arts Curse dissolved within a week of the Little Hangleton operation, as enchantments without living casters dissolved, propagating from inertia rather than intent, until a single dissolution technique removed it cleanly. Professor Lupin accepted the position permanently in year 6, under a contract clause drafted by Hermione stating that the position's terms were unaffected by the holder's lycanthropy status, which was a medical condition and not a professional disqualification. He read the clause 4 times before he signed. Azkaban's population began its decline before the official review concluded. The systematic review of every case processed under Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s tenure identified 12 wrongful imprisonments in the first 3 months, 19 by year's end, 31 total. The Dementors' removal took longer. They were not simply guards, but a political institution, their presence representing decades of a ministry that had found it convenient to have something that fed on despair available as a deterrent, and had preferred not to examine the implications too closely. Hermione's alternative design took 2 years to complete and 118 pages to present to the Wizengamot. It passed by 6 votes. The Dementors left Azkaban in the summer after Harry's 7th year. The prison became quieter, colder in the physical rather than the psychic sense, a place of containment rather than of punishment for its own sake. Sirius, on the committee overseeing the transition, did not attend the day they withdrew. He spent it at Grimmauld Place, in the kitchen he had painted yellow in the first month after his release. Harry spent it with him. They made breakfast and talked about other things and left the kitchen window open because it was August and the light coming through it was ordinary light. Warm and uncomplicated. The kind that fell on everyone equally. Lucius Malfoy's trial concluded in the spring of Year 5. The conviction under Article 7 of the Peverell Regency Act created precedent. The precedent created a standard. And the standard created over the following decade a body of case law addressing blood supremacism in British wizarding society with a directness that modern statute had never managed. It did not end prejudice. Harry had not expected it to. Neither had Hermione, who understood that laws changed structures and structures changed conditions and conditions changed, over generations, what people were capable of believing, without embarrassment. The process was slow. It was also the only process that had ever worked. Draco Malfoy visited Harry 8 years after Hogwarts to discuss a dark artifact from his father's estate. The conversation lasted 40 minutes, conducted entirely professionally, and concluded with Draco recommending a specialist. He established his artifact restoration practice the following year. It became, within a decade, the most respected of its kind in Britain. Harry and Hermione never discussed what to make of this. It seemed to make itself. The Hollow's fate was decided across 3 years of conversation that neither of them treated as urgent, because permanent decisions were owed the time they required. The Elder Wand Harry carried for 47 years. He used it as the grimoire's final pages described, as an instrument of making, of repair, of the specific work of building things that lasted. To finalize Azkaban's alternative enchantment structure. To stabilize the Forbidden Forest's boundary wards after a storm in his 32nd year, damaged 3 foundational anchor points. To teach, in the Advanced Ancient Runes seminar he ran at Hogwarts for 20 years alongside Hermione's Theory of Foundational Magic course, the principles Antioch had encoded in its wood. The Resurrection Stone he used twice, in formal Wizengamot proceedings where a testimony that could not otherwise be given was the only remaining path to justice. The first time, in his 19th year, he held the stone for 6 minutes, and asked the questions the proceeding required, and then put it in his pocket, and did not think about who else he could have called with it. Because he had thought about this extensively before the first use, and had arrived at the same understanding he always arrived at, grief was not a problem the stone could solve. It could only give grief a form, and grief already had a form. What grief needed was not a tool. It needed time and honesty, and the people who were still present. He did not turn it for his parents. He had thought about this for a long time, and the answer was always the same. They had died giving him life, and what he owed them was the living of it. Not a visit. The living. The invisibility cloak passed to his daughter. She was 12. He did not ask her to account for its uses. It had never worked that way. September. 50-something. A window in Hogwarts. The black lake below held the reflection of an early autumn sky, the same sky it had held for 1,000 years, indifferent to the centuries of students it had watched arrive on its eastern shore. The boats were crossing now, carrying this year's first years, 11-year-olds, small against the lake's breadth, some of them pointing up at the castle with the specific gesture of people encountering something that exceeds what they had been told to expect. Harry watched them. Hermione was beside him, gray at her temples, put there by 30 years of work done without apology or diminishment. She carried her current notebook, the 43rd in the system she had started in a cold alcove, in the early hours of a September morning that felt, from this distance, both very recent and very long ago. "Do you remember what you thought that first night?" she said. "When the wand came to you?" "I thought I'd done something wrong," said Harry. "That I'd taken something that wasn't mine. And now?" The boats reached the far shore. The first years climbed out, gathered at the water's edge, looked up at the castle with the expression every generation of 11-year-olds had brought to that shore. the expression of people standing at the edge of their own futures and understanding, for the first time, that the futures are real. "Now I think the wand knew something we didn't," said Harry. "About what we were going to need. About who we were going to have to be." "It chose well," said Hermione. "It chose both of us," said Harry. That was the smart part. The great doors of Hogwarts opened. The light from inside fell across the grass on the water's edge, and the small uncertain figures climbing toward it, warm and constant and old. The light of a place that had been waiting for each of them specifically, as it had waited for the two of them on a September evening 37 years ago. They watched until the last child was through the doors. The doors closed. Below them, in the Chamber of Secrets, sealed behind a lock that required both their signatures to open. The Elder Wand rested in the dark beside the Resurrection Stone. It had been there for 3 years. It would be there when they were gone. It was still. Not dormant. The wand was never simply dormant, did not have the capacity for the simple absence of dormancy. Still in the way that a river was still between its bends, moving in its deepest channel, without surface agitation, without the quality of force being held back. Simply present. Doing what it had always done when it was with the right people, which was nothing dramatic. Being there. Being enough. Outside, the September evening continued. The lake settled. The sky above the highlands moved through its colors toward dark, indifferent and beautiful, the same sky it had always been. 2 people stood at a window and said nothing else, because nothing else was required, because the story had arrived where stories arrived when they were told correctly, not at an ending, but at a place where continuing was no longer something that needed to be arranged. It was simply what happened next. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.